Hey out there, this is Philip underscore again with the Chicago cannabis community, bringing you a really special interview. I have the one and only Alderman Andre Vasquez of the 40th Ward right here with us, politician, organizer, former rapper and lyricist, and certainly someone that is really making some progressive changes throughout our city. He's currently a member of the Chicago chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. And also he's a part of the Progressive Caucus within the City Council of Chicago. So we're gonna go ahead and run through some questions and just have a conversation, in particular about cannabis around the effects with legal aspects, changes, how we can make things more accessible for folks out there in Chicago. And again, just looking forward to having a conversation. So Alderman Vasquez, how are you today?
Hey, doing all right. Thank you for having me on, Philip. Really glad to be here. Obviously, we find ourselves in very challenging times across the board. It's interesting because for me, when I think of 2020, the joke I keep cracking is like, I don't know if it was an even trade-off that cannabis got legal in 2020 and everything else is crazy now. I don't know that that's a fair,
Right.
but it is definitely the legalization, especially in Illinois, is something that I think is historic. And I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. I think for a lot of people, that legalization came just in time with all the stress going on in our society today. Mm-hmm. And with all that, with those changes, I wanted to ask why, in particular, legal reform around cannabis is so important and how it can impact Chicago as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really can't be understated how important it actually is. And I say that thinking about like my own personal experience growing up. Like the first time I got arrested, I was 17 because I was with people who were smoking. I didn't smoke at the time. I wasn't cool enough yet, I guess is how I viewed it. But like the friends that I were with were African American, and police rolled up and arrested them and acting like I wasn't with them. Like I had to raise my hand to say I was with them. And like, obviously we didn't have the repercussions many hundreds of thousands of people have had because of the drug war, right? Realizing that how we're in this system where if you're part of a marginalized group, you don't get square one anyway. You don't have an even playing field. And if anything, you get set back for things like that. The fact that it is legal now, I think on a social justice and an equity lens is important. And also in trying to figure out how an industry is going to grow. Because what we understand is, like many other industries, it can grow without the people that have been most impacted by the war on drugs, and we have to make sure we get that right. So there are a million reasons why it's important, and why I keep an eye on it as it moves forward too.
Yeah, it's important that we have people like you that are looking forward and not just saying, oh, well, we've had 20, 30 years of incarceration, harsh, enforcement, imprisonment for people, creating an industry, and now other people can now benefit from it.
That's right.
And with your involvement with the Progressive Caucus, can you share a little bit more about what that represents and what you all are doing as a collective within the City Council?
Yeah, so I mean, so through the Progressive Caucus, we try our best to make sure that we put justice, inclusivity, equity at the forefront of everything that we're doing, right? So we look at every issue going on. Like right now, we're heading into the budget, and we're going, hey, how are we investing dollars to make sure that Black and brown communities are being invested in, that we're putting mental health and public safety above like policing, right? So there's a lot of that. Now, as it relates to cannabis itself, it might not shock people to know that there's a lot of older generations in city council with a lot of different perspectives on cannabis. So I think it's pretty fair to say that when it comes to cannabis and city council, like I'm the guy talking about it. And so I reach out to like the Black Caucus, talk to like the Latino Caucus, talk to Progressive Caucus, and just give people updates as things are moving or in the current instance, not moving, to see what can be done, which is challenging because a lot of it is state law.
Yeah. Where do you think the disconnect comes from a generational aspect, especially for people that have been over large sections of the city for a long time and feel connected, but don't see the impact of, when it comes to cannabis legalization?
I mean, I think it's it's programming, for lack of a better word, right? Like when you're talking about the very specific approach that people took towards weed, like the reefer madness, calling it marijuana and saying that's what Mexican people are smoking, like tying it into smoking like nicotine. There is a clear intentional and deliberate attempt to make sure that cannabis wasn't growing as an industry, right? Like you can look at prohibition with alcohol. They were doing the same thing with alcohol up until the point where it was made legal. And even then people were kind of running their industries. So I think when you think about that, if you're growing up in like the last 50, 60 years, if not longer, of the states making that the narrative about cannabis, it's hard to undo that. I think if you're younger, or not even younger, but if you're a smoker or somebody who's partaken in cannabis, you understand that it's not what it marketed as or was marketed as. But if you're somebody who grew up like, hey, I got to follow the rules. These are what the rules say. Like I don't do that. And I look at it as like a sin or that kind of vice. It's going to be hard to change somebody's perspective on it. And I think that's part of what my job is talking people through it to go, look, it's not deadlier than alcohol. You get a lot of car accidents and everything else. And yet we look at that like it's commonplace and people should be able to go get their drink wherever. And you can't look at these two things from a different lens when one is clearly more dangerous than the other. And that's the one that's more accepted.
Yeah, well, at least that perception is changing, certainly with everything that's happened at the beginning of this year as well.
Yeah, I think legalizing is what does that, right? At some point, it's like, hey, guess what? It's not against the rules anymore, so we have to figure out as society how we actually move forward with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And with legalization happening, and as you mentioned, helping to increase diversity and being that voice, what have been some barriers when it's come to increasing diversity or getting more people of color within the industry, within the state?
Yeah, I think here's what I see as a challenge, right? Is like, regardless of legality or not, rich folk are rich folk. And when you're talking about the level of capital you need to establish a cannabis business, to get the licenses for a dispensary, to get the security, to be able to get the product, right? It is so capital heavy on the front end that it is naturally more accessible to those who have means. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of white men, like a lot of other industries, they're at the front of the line because they're able to access those funds to do so. I think the state, you got to give the state legislators their credit. It's the most progressive legislation in the country, but that doesn't mean that there's still not far ways to go, right? So the challenge right now is the folks who have the capital and are ready to go, they're at the front of the line. Everyone else is trying to catch up, but also because the laws have to be fair, meaning without a disparity study, you can't assume disparity, even though we all know there's disparity, right? So now even those industries can't move forward. So you're not getting as many dispensaries out there, and you're also not getting the social equity players to get out there, right? Plus, like everything else, if you got more money, you know how to game a system. So if you know what the checklist is for social equity, you got the access to hire somebody to hit the marks, right? I think what's challenging is everyone has the best intention in crafting law, but we also know how crafty people are as far as figuring out their way to the finish line, regardless of what law is or isn't.
Yeah.
And it's tough for us to be in the middle of it.
Yeah. Well, the good thing I think, at least with everything going on, is that the conversations are happening, and even things like this just help give people more awareness about, certainly how things can be bent or made for other people's gain, but certainly so people can be aware of it for their own awareness and how they can maybe make some changes too.
And I think the opportunity too is like those folks with the access, they want to build dispensaries, but they can't even do it right now because the city itself has like made it challenging. Like you've got to go through a zoning process, you've got to have the money to go through the zoning process, all of these things to get to the other end of the line. And because we've got members of city council who are like, you know what, I'm not trying to help anybody, because if it ain't our folks, it shouldn't be anyone. And that's fair. I get that. I think there's a fine line to walk in between that, because the industry, those with the access, they want in. they can't get in, but they want in. But they've also got the money to fund programs, right? So the way I view it is like the conversation needs to be like, hey, I know you all want to set up your businesses, but we're not getting the social equity out of it yet. So you all need to ante up and provide that where government can't, right? If government can't create those rules yet because there's no disparity study, all right, we got to wait until the end of that study, I think, which is supposed to be beginning of the year. But you all got the money now, so y'all should be anteing up for people to have the funds to establish like a security business or other ancillary businesses for cannabis, because you can have black and brown and like marginalized groups, people who have been arrested, all be at the forefront of that without a license. Like, hey, you can start these businesses now, right? The other thing I've been trying to talk to somebody in the industry is like setting up almost like a 401k, like, hey, but explicitly for cannabis, like business. So let's say you're a manager for a dispensary because you got hired by one of the big players, right? Cool. You do 5 years, you get this amount of money that's saved up that you could then take and then get your license, have your location, franchise or be an owner, or do something else where you get ownership. And because you invested so much time helping out the players that are already in the game, you also get the funding to start your own. Like I think being able to talk through that would allow people to accept some of the industry players and go, okay, look, we get that you're white and male, but clearly you're doing things that are helping out as best as we can figure this out. So maybe let's take the next steps forward so we can build up the other industries as well.
Yeah, you know, and that's the thing about like being diverse is that it actually helps out everyone when people, you know, open up additional doors. So it's great that you mentioned that, because we're always going to have the big people no matter what. I mean, that's just how our society's created.
All right. Yeah.
And structured right now. Yeah.
Totally.
And local people that, you know, may not be looking to open their own dispensary or even get involved as someone working in the industry, but just want to show support or help to make exceptions. Do you have any advice on how maybe local people can maybe provide support to some of these changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting in touch with groups, right? Like normal, like other groups that do cannabis work, but also just talking to your neighbors. Like I think for me, especially in this time where like people aren't connected as much, but virtually they're trying to, the more we talk about it and make it commonplace, the more things move. If people keep acting like it's taboo or they look at it a certain kind of way, then it doesn't move forward as fruitfully as it could, right? And I think we're in a position, like I was saying earlier, like if the businesses feel like they want to set up but they can't, and the social equity wants to move forward but it can't, then maybe those two groups figure it out together before government needs to like step in and go, cool, are you putting the programs that the social equity folks are saying thumbs up, you're part of the team? All right, then let's figure out how we can like expedite certain things to move forward so we actually grow out the industry.
With that being said, I also wanted to maybe touch on just how much cannabis sales are like breaking revenue records pretty much every month. But I think, you know, I'm a lifelong Chicagoan, born and raised. I think about the lottery. I think about all the different tolls and things that are made to raise revenue. We see all this revenue, but certainly, can you maybe share insight about where the revenue is also being kind of directly impacted for Chicago from the cannabis sales? Maybe even
well, I think what we had for the last year was 3%, and I think we pulled in maybe, I want to say it was something like 5 to 8 million. So it wasn't like a lot, right? It was clearly something. But I think part of it is inhibited because there aren't enough dispensaries and enough revenue going, right? Like if you were to look at like Evanston or Naperville or other areas where people don't have as much infringement upon like trying to set up businesses, they're able to set up and get more revenue going. I think it all boils back to that same problem that like if we had more dispensaries opening, we would also get more revenue. But because we don't have the social equity component and people are like, I'm not trying to move without that, then we're somewhat inhibited in the growth of what happens in the city, because your industry person is going to go, why am I going to wait 8 months to a year to find out if I even get a spot when I can just go to the suburbs and get it done more quickly, right? Like that's the challenge. I think what I'm trying to figure out is how do you how do you create something where you open up the avenue? Like what I have been like kind of kicking around in my head is the zoning board of Chicago makes those decisions. It's not even the alders. They decide who moves forward and who doesn't. So what I kept thinking was, what if you take into consideration how much revenue each applicant currently has? Meaning, if you got way more money, you can wait it out. You can sit there through the process. You got your lawyers. But if you don't have that funds, I think you should move to the front of the line, because that is most likely going to be marginalized groups, Black and brown, folks who've been arrested and impacted, who don't have that level of capital. They've got some, but not the big boy money. And if they go to the front of the line and we make it quicker for them, they get to set up, and then everything else starts moving too, but they get, like, in effect, not a preference, but you're taking into account the fact that they might not even survive the process. So you want to make sure they're successful. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And also, as we record this, it's November 1. We have a major election right around the corner. Can you talk about just the impact of voting and why voting on a city and state level is also just as important as voting on a federal level too?
Yeah, 100%. I think, first I'll say it's November 1st. And if people don't know by now, all right, then I don't know what you're smoking. Right. So you need to clearly, if you look at where we're at, right, we've got kids in cages, we got a fascist in the White House, we got a pandemic, people dying, and economic depression. That's all because I believe people have lost a lot of faith in the system in general, that regardless of party, there's a group of folks that go, nobody speaks for our causes, nobody's got my back, why do I need to get involved? And I think I can say that being somebody who felt that way prior to, like, getting woke and learning this stuff, right? Like, it's easy to feel that way because there's a lot of truth to it, right? Even now, I know what I'm voting for, right? We're voting for Biden to get Trump out, but even Biden couldn't say legalizing was the move to go. And it's like, it's 2020, right? So I think that is why it is more important to get people to vote. Because if you look at these elected officials, all they are when they're at their best is customer service. But they're only going to listen to the customers that show up. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, you're the one that votes? Cool, what's the thing that's important to you? That's what we're going to work on. And if you're somebody who doesn't vote, they'll be like, okay, like, I hear you, but you're not ultimately helping me retain my position or leave. Like, that is let's be real. That's what it's really about. And so the more people engage, make their voices heard, and vote at every level of government, you're then going to get people that listen to the thing that you want to do because they know you help get them in and you're the people that can get them out. But if you don't even play in the game, so to speak, and you're not involved, you're a non-factor. And you can be angry, and rightfully so, but you're not going to get the level of response as if you were engaged and holding those folks accountable. Because at root, whether we think of them as like on pedestals or these special folks, they're not. They're people like you and me, and it is their job to be public servants. And that means the public needs to let us know, but you got to engage to be able to do so.
Wonderful. That's, you know, you're pretty much preaching to the choir for me, because I recognize how important social justice is, but also being able to say, hey, on the actual process to where we can actually elect people and get them in the office, even when it comes to electing people that recognize our struggles, or, you know, our voices are part of our community, like yourself, getting new voices, politics, it's so important. So it's great that we were able to certainly wrap up the interview with that question as the main kind of, you know, final point.
And yes, I'll just add this on, just for my, like I said, I grew up in the city. I didn't even know what an alderman did at all. Like, I didn't start getting involved till 35. I'm 41 years old. So, like, think about how much we could all get accomplished if we all, like, were in on it early. Like, I am firmly of the belief that there's more of us that believe in the things that we do, but there aren't more of us voting. And so that's why we need everybody. That's why I always say, talk to your neighbors and get that out there, because you can't count on, let's say, the public education system to be the one to school you on civic engagement.
Right.
If you're hoping on that, you're out the game. But if we keep talking to each other as movement leaders, as activists, as organizers, and just as neighbors, then we're in a lot better shape and we can continue building towards what we want to see.
Absolutely. Well, Alderman Vasquez, thank you so much. Wanted to also give you an opportunity to share any platforms or areas where people can follow you, learn more about you, also support.
Yeah, absolutely. So one, I will also say, as I've said publicly before, I consume cannabis as well. I know a lot of people that are elected officials probably won't say that, even if they do. But I think in the interest of making sure that we normalize things, let's all talk that through, right? But if people want to follow the work that I'm doing, they can go to any of like the platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you can look at Andre for 40th. That's ANDREFOR40TH on any of the platforms. And we're always sharing the work that we're doing and how folks can plug in.
Wonderful. I'll make sure that those links are also included when we post the episode for the interview. Alderman Vasquez, thank you again. Really appreciate your voice and being a part of the community. And yeah, for everyone else, enjoy the rest of your day and be sure to go vote.
Super quick tip. I'm sorry, because we're all talking to cannabis folks out here. Don't share blunts. Don't share joints. Don't share bowls. COVID is real. Like, have your own stuff. I get it's all communal. I miss that like a lot of other people do, but we want folks to be safe as well. Do what you need to do responsibly, and like, thank you all for like really sustaining and surviving through all this stuff too. And feel free to reach out if you need anything.
Absolutely. Yeah. Don't share. Bring your own stuff.
Got you. Yep. All right.
All right.
Thank
you. Take care. Thank you.
You too.